Looking at the functions of the somatic and autonomic nervous system and comparing them, we can see that our somatic nervous system has a really heavily myelinated axon. This is our lower motor neuron that we just looked at. And that axon is going to terminate at our skeletal muscle at the neuromuscular junction, releasing acetylcholine at its synapse. It's always going to stimulate, it's always going to be stimulatory. Versus our autonomic nervous system, we have our sympathetic and our parasympathetic function. Our sympathetic preganglionic neuron is going to leave the spinal cord and go into the periphery, and it's more lightly myelinated, and it's going to initially synapse. The preganglionic neuron is going to synapse at a peripheral ganglia. This peripheral ganglia is close to the spinal cord for the sympathetic nervous system, and it's going to release acetylcholine to nicotinic receptors, and then that binding is going to send another action potential to the non-myelinated postganglionic axon, which is going to synapse at the organ of action, and it's going to release norepinephrine. Now, our other sympathetic nerve function can be the preganglionic axon, actually synapses directly with the adrenal medulla, releasing acetylcholine to nicotinic receptors that lead to the release from chromaffin cells of hormone versions of epinephrine and norepinephrine that go directly into the blood vessels, causing sympathetic action to our organs. And lastly, we have our parasympathetic function here. We have a preganglionic, lightly myelinated axon that's going to synapse in its peripheral ganglia, releasing acetylcholine, which binds to nicotinic receptors. And then this action potential travels a short distance to a non-myelinated postganglionic axon, where it's going to synapse at the viscera, the organs of action, releasing acetylcholine. And this parasympathetic and sympathetic action can be stimulatory or inhibitory, depends on the neurotransmitter, depends on the receptors, and depends on the effector organ. Here are some anatomical and physiological differences between the two. I think this is a great study table to kind of help you learn, compare, contrast, and you can maybe even talk through this with your study buddies between the parasympathetic and sympathetic divisions of the autonomic nervous system. If we're kind of trying to categorize things, there's three main differences. The site of origin, our parasympathetic fibers are craniosacral, coming from the cranial nerves, the brain and the brain stem, and then sacrum, the spinal cord. Versus our sympathetic fibers are thoracolumbar, coming from the thoracic and lumbar regions of the spinal cord via the thoracic horn of gray matter. The length of the fibers is different. Our parasympathetic preganglionic fibers are long, and postganglionic fibers are short. And sympathetic is the opposite. Sympathetic preganglionic fibers are short, and postganglionic fibers are long. And then ganglia, therefore, are different in location. The parasympathetic ganglia are pretty much at their effector organ, versus sympathetic ganglia are really close to the spinal cord in general. The cell bodies for the parasympathetic neurons, for the most part, are in the brainstem or again in the spinal cord. And we can see some of these parasympathetic fibers. So we have our oculomotor nerve, which contains parasympathetic fibers. This controls the smooth muscle of the eye to cause pupils to constrict and lenses to bulge to help with focusing, thinking about like reading a book. We also have postganglionic cell bodies here that are located in the ciliary ganglia within the eye orbitals. Our facial nerve stimulates the glands in the head, so it has parasympathetic innervation. The fibers that activate our nasal and lacrimal glands synapse in the pterygopalatine ganglia, and then fibers that activate the submandibular and sublingual glands synapse in the submandibular ganglia. And there are glossopharyngeal nerves that stimulate our parotid salivary glands, synapse in the otic ganglia. The most vital cranial nerve of all is the vagus nerve, which is 90% of all preganglionic parasympathetic fibers in the body. It serves our thoracic and abdominal viscera, and the preganglionic fibers come from the medulla. They synapse in terminal ganglia or intramural ganglia in the walls of the target organ. And we have some kind of plexes in general that are associated with these actions. So our cardiac plexus is slowing down the heart rate by synapsing with the postganglionic axon synapse on the SA and AV node, slowing things down. Our pulmonary plexus serves our lungs and bronchi. It's going to lead to bronchodilation. And our esophageal plexus form the anterior and posterior vagal trunks, and this sends information downward to our digestive organs. Our sacral parasympathetic division originates from neurons S2 through 4 and serves pelvic organs and more the lower half of the large intestine, the distal portion. The axons travel in the ventral root of the spinal nerves and they branch off to form pelvic splanchnic nerves that then synapse with our ganglia in the pelvic floor, our inferior hypogastric or pelvic plexus. The intramural ganglia and the walls of the distal half of the large intestine, bladder, ureters, and reproductive organs as well. Our sympathetic division has different anatomical structure. The preganglionic neurons originate in the thoracolumbar region of T1 through L2, and the ganglia are all really close for the most part to the spinal cord. Even these kind of ganglia over here are relatively close. There are 23 paravertebral ganglia in this sympathetic chunk, there sympathetic chain, this yellow thing, 3 cervical, 11 thoracic, 4 lumbar, 4 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. So there's several different pathways that they can synapse overall, and there is a pathway for synapsing in the adrenal medulla. Some preganglionic fibers will leave the lateral horn of the spinal cord via the ventral root and then the spinal nerve, and they'll kind of pass off via this thoracic splanchnic nerve. They don't synapse in this space. And then they go all the way down and they innervate at the adrenal medulla, specifically these chromaffin cells. When an action potential reaches these cells, it's going to essentially release acetylcholine, which binds to nicotinic receptors on these cells, which stimulates the release of granules or hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine, or noradrenaline and norepinephrine. And then those hormones are going to move into the bloodstream. Um, let's see here. That is our end of our conversation, our introduction to the nervous system.